Hello friends, welcome back to Haas of Props. Today I'm going to show you how I made one of my favorite pieces from the Lord of the Rings prologue completely out of EVA foam. Let's get started. Before I started work on the helmet, I did an internet dive trying to find high-res pictures of the helmet because it's seen only briefly in the Fellowship. And I have found auction sites to be a treasure trove of images. Usually they cover the piece from every angle and they have high-res pics. And the ones I found of this helmet came in very helpful when creating the design and especially when figuring out the filigree placement. Go ahead and cut out two pieces of part A and we will begin by closing up the darts. To do this, apply a thin layer of contact cement onto each side of the dart, allow the cement to become tacky almost to the point that it feels dry, and press the two sides together. Align the registration marks and then the outside edge, and then press firmly to make sure there is a good connection happening and that there won't be any separating. After you've closed up all the darts on each part A, go ahead and attach the two A pieces together in the very same manner. Begin by aligning the nose guard and work your way back the seam, aligning the registration marks as you proceed. And when you make it to the end of the seam, make sure the back edges are in line with each other as well. Next, part B can be attached to the lower edges of the A unit. It's the exact same principle as before. Align the outer edges and work your way down the seam. While I finish attaching these, I would appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and go ahead and click the notification bell so you can get updates when a new project is released. You want to give each part C a slight bevel on the side indicated in the template, and then C can be attached to the bottom edges of B. The bevel will give you the curve you need to get the slight bend in the base of the helmet. And then close up the seam between the C pieces. At this point, you want to curve the helmet shape a little. To do this, heat the foam with a heat gun. You don't want it too hot, just warm enough that you can bend the helmet and create a little bit more of a flare out at the bottom. Now take a rotary tool with a sanding drum and bevel the inside edges of the outer edges of the face area. This will make the helmet not look so thick and make it look like it's made from a thinner material. Now swap out the sanding drum for a smooth sanding tip and sand over all the seams. This will help get rid of any height differences in the foam and leave you with a very thin seam line, which we will clean up even further a little later on. At this point, you'll notice that my helmet has magically changed colors. If only it was because of magic. Actually, when I was sanding the seams, the postman rang the doorbell, and when I got back from answering it, the helmet had flipped over on its side and was leaning against the hot end of the heat gun, which had melted a hole through it. How it didn't catch fire, I'll never know. But thankfully it didn't, so I rebuilt it with some black EVA foam. Now we are going to take some foam clay and fill in some of the seam areas. Roll it into a thin tubular shape and press it into the seam created by parts B and C. Then dip your fingers into a little water and smooth out the clay. This will make the pieces look like one solid shape and not two glued together. Make sure to really smooth the edges of the clay or they will be visible when you paint the helmet. You can also use the clay on other spots that you feel need to be a little more smooth. While the clay is drying, we can start to assemble the crest. Attach a part D and a part E to each other with contact cement. All the crest pieces have a bevel on their inside edges because we want there to be a noticeable angular edge. Then each of the DE units can be attached to each other only along the E edge. Leave the top of the crest unattached. This will make assembly for the smaller pieces a lot easier. Then attach the two part F pieces to each other along the edge indicated in the template. This can then be attached to the DE unit. I found it works best to attach one side and then the other instead of working my way back both sides at the same time. The two pieces of part G can be attached the same way and inserted into the rear of the crest. Now the top of the crest can be sealed shut. You want this top edge to be as tight as possible without any large gaps showing, so if you need to bevel out a little more foam before you begin gluing, go for it. Now after the foam clay has dried, we can glue the crest onto the top of the helmet. This can be done with contact cement and make sure it is completely attached. The front point should be in line with the dart seams and the center seam. Check to make sure that the back of the crest mount is also in line with the center seam. The rear crest mount might have some gaps showing, just attach it in line with the center seam and we will deal with the gaps momentarily. On the front base point, add some foam clay down the center seam. Use some wet fingers to blend the clay into the crest and bring the clay down into a nice sharp point. Add some clay to the curved side pieces on the crest mount to accentuate the curve and bring the tips to more of a point. When adding small foam clay details like this, water is your friend. It allows the clay to move easily and be super pliable while also helping to achieve a smooth surface finish without sculpting bumps. Use foam clay to fill in any gaps in the rear support and sculpt the rear details just like the ones in the front. Once all the clay is dry, I take some quick seal and continue with seam cleanup. To do this, I use a palette knife to apply the quick seal to the seam. Excess can be scraped away, and a finger with a little water will smooth out what's left. Make sure you smooth the edges of the caulk as you go, or it will result in more work later on. I wanted this project to be really smooth, and the caulk does shrink slightly, so I ended up repeating this step 3 times in order to make sure the final result would be as smooth as possible. When all the caulk was dry, I take some 400 grit sandpaper and lightly sand over all the caulked areas, just to ensure there weren't any build-up areas I wasn't seeing. Next, the nose guard piece was attached to the helmet with some CA glue. The template has been updated to supply more 6mm foam to support the entire nose guard piece. The eyebrows can be attached the same way, and then the edges can be sanded with a smooth sanding tip. This will remove the cut edge and make the pieces look more like it's sculpted into the shape of the helmet and not just applied. To engrave the foam, I'm using a pointed tip on a wood burner. This will melt the foam and leave an engraved opening. The fumes from this process are toxic, so use a mask in a very well ventilated area. Now the entire helmet can be heat sealed with a heat gun before applying the filigree details. If we heat sealed after, the filigree might curl and warp. In order to make the template for the filigree, I drew the design onto the helmet with some Sharpies and then traced the design onto some tracing paper. This way I could look at the reference images and see where the filigree needed to be placed, draw it on, and not yet worry about flattening out the design. By then tracing off of a curved surface onto a flexible flat piece of tracing paper, I was able to take a design in 3-dimensional space and transfer it to a 2-dimensional plane. Once I had the general shape of the filigree, I could clean up the edges and the details. Then the pieces were cut out of 2mm foam, and I decided to attach them to the helmet with E6000. My reasoning for this was contact cement would have been a pain to deal with such small pieces, and CA glue would dry too quickly. This way, the E6000 was firm enough to hold, but also wet enough so that I could adjust placement as I moved along. The cheek side piece arches over the AB seam and wraps down to the outer edge of part C and ends back at the center seam. And the forehead cheek piece wraps from the cheek guard up over the forehead, covering the front dart seam on part A. A good starting point is to start where the point of the filigree aligns with the point of the helmet cheek guard, and then work down the cheek and then up over the forehead. Add the filigree pieces to both sides, and then the edges of the filigree can be smoothed just like the nose guard and eyebrows. Since these pieces are smaller, I'm using a smaller smooth sanding tip on my rotary tool, but the result will be the same. At this point, we're ready to begin priming. To do this, I always use Plasti-Dip, and I usually apply 2 to 3 coats. For this project, I'm going to use 3 in order to make sure everything is evenly covered, and it will help fill in any areas that may still need a little smoothing. Once the plasti has dried overnight, I begin painting. Looking at the reference images, you can see how the base color is a gold that has a green hue to it. To get this, I mix some metallic brushed gold, fresh olive, Kelly green, and ivy green together. Make sure everything is thoroughly mixed and you don't have any streaks of color. I thin this with some water and load it into my airbrush that has the changeable reservoirs. Airbrushing will help us avoid brush marks and give us a finish very close to the original helmets. Once the green gold dried, I achieved this speckling effect by taking this bright gold spray paint and dusting the surface. By dusting, I mean hold the can about 18 to 24 inches away from the object, lightly press the plunger so you get a light mist of paint, and let the paint lightly fall onto the surface of the helmet. If you hold the can too close, you will get heavy spots, so remember, distance and a light touch are paramount for this technique to work. Once the gold speckling is dry, I take some metallic gold enamel and brush the nose guard, eyebrows, and filigree. I give each 2 coats just to make sure there weren't any brush marks showing when it dried, and this will create some variation on the helmet's surface just like the originals. And there you have it, a second age High Elven helmet from the Lord of the Rings prologue at the Siege of Barad-dûr during the War of the Last Alliance. You can see here how the speckling has created variation on the helmet surface, and the gold enamel accentuates the filigree vine details. I hope you liked this build. If you did and you would like to make one of these for yourself, you can find a link to the template in the below description. And please, give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Haas of Props. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.